Greetings, God's blessings to all of you who have joined us this afternoon. We are straight up on 1 o'clock, but we're going to wait just a couple more minutes. We had some people logging on here right at the last second, so we'll wait just another minute or so and we'll get started with today's webinar. But we're so glad you have joined us. See, my other tech quandary is that my computer clock is always 2 to 3 minutes behind regular time. It just throws my whole world off. But I'm sure our attendees are sad that that on-hold music is gone.
Everybody needs a little bit of good elevator music to start a webinar.
That's right. That's right. Dun, 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 dun. And you thought you were coming here for a serious webinar today.
You've listened to that for far too long.
I have. It just makes me wonder. I've been doing these webinars for 7 years, and that's the first time I've heard the elevator music was today.
Sorry.
Oh, no, don't be sorry. I appreciate the fact that it happened. All righty, I think we'll get going. Looks like people are still getting on, but we'll go ahead and get started for our webinar this afternoon on technology. We're so glad Mr. Matthew Bergholt is with us today from LCMS School Ministry. And Matt, I don't even know what your appropriate title is, but you have been our tech guy at our LCMS national mission conferences for several times. And so, you know, I just, you're the tech guy. So do you have an official title?
I do. Official title is Manager of Online Support and Services in the School Ministry Office.
All right. Excellent. Awesome. I'm glad I don't have to memorize that. So so wonderful. And for those of you that don't know, we also have Jenna Mcmiller on with us today. She is our new, the right hand of RSTM now. So she's doing all the hard work while I just get to do all the talking. And so it's so good to have Jenna with us. And now she's officially getting her webinar feet wet here with the with starting and stopping and get everything running. So we're glad to have Jenna on board. And we're so thankful you've all joined us today for our webinar. Just a couple of things. I see one of you have already taken advantage of the chat feature. There's a couple of ways that you can ask questions during our presentation today. On the left-hand side, if you look at the attendee list, there's also a attendee chat feature there. You can type questions in that, or at the very top, along that toolbar along the top, there's a place where you can click and type your questions in audience questions. So if you have a question for Matt as we're going along today, please take advantage of that. We'll have his presentation, and then I'll try to do a little Q&A time at the end with any questions you might have. And if we run a little long or we aren't able to answer your question fully, Matt's contact information is going to be on his PowerPoint. You will be there will be posted an opportunity to download his PowerPoint from today, so you'll have his contact information, and I know he would be more than happy to give you any assistance down the road with any questions you might have. So without any further ado, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, we give you thanks that in so many and various ways you have called us to serve you, and especially through these weird and trying times that we've been in lately. Technology has been such a blessing, and sometimes, though, it's been a bit of a curse. And so we pray your blessing upon our time today, Lord, that our webinar is fruitful and that it might serve to assist us in the various ministries you have called us to accomplish. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Matt, take it away.
All right, thanks. So technology and the church in a rural and small town setting, it's really interesting to think about how this looks different for the small town churches, for the rural churches. And hopefully I can give you a little bit more to chew on, to think about as we go through this today, and how we can best, how I can help best equip you guys to move forward with what we've dealt with in the last year now, and what's coming. And hopefully to better prepare you for some of those changes that may be coming down the road. So let's get started today. As it was mentioned earlier, I'm Matt Bergholt. Official long title is the manager of online support and services in the Office of National Mission in the School Ministry office. That really doesn't tell you anything about me. It's a bunch of words all smashed together. It makes my business cards about this long. But what I do is I work with schools and I work with districts in the realm of our resources from the school ministry office. That's my main role. So anything that the school ministry office publishes comes across my desk. That's chapel talks, National Lutheran Schools Week stuff, everything that deals with our school ministry mailings. And then I also deal with everything that's in the Luth Ed bubble. You might have heard of luthed.org. That's kind of our resource clearinghouse for school ministry. And then all the Luth Ed Facebook pages for teachers, our social ministry or social media presence, and then helping with National Lutheran School accreditation, that process, NLSA, and anything else that the Office of National Mission decides that they need me to do, especially in the realm of technology. I know Todd kind of mentioned earlier about being the go-to guy in a lot of places for conferences, but that also goes to I am able to help and answer any of the questions that you may have, or at least if I don't know, point you in the right direction. So please, you see my contact information there. To please reach out, let me know if you have any questions, if you need anything, if there's something from this presentation that we either don't get to, or that you have another question, 2 weeks down the road, definitely just reach out, give me an email, a call. We're still working from home, as much as I would say that this lovely background here is from the LCMS International Center. It is my dining room. So please email first. Calls do come to us, but that would be the easiest to get a hold of us. So that's me in a nutshell. We're going to talk about 5 big things today. I know I kind of alluded to some of this in what I wrote for the small little write-up that went into the newsletter. But I want to touch on 5 big things. We're going to kind of unpack them a little bit. If you have questions, like I said, reach out in the chat. I'm kind of keeping an eye on that as we go. But also, if you've got something that you want to kind of wait till the end, you'll see everything, write it down. And we're going to kind of explore this and leave time for questions. So of the 5, we're going to talk about bigger is not always better. We can talk about technology. We're talking about ministry objectives, the concepts of reactive versus proactive, the idea of communication, and there's going to be 3 parts to that discussion on communication. And then we're going to talk about keep moving, kind of an initiative to move forward and to really get you thinking about where things are and could be going for you in your ministry setting. All right, so those 5 things will guide us today. All right, so number 1, bigger is not always better. And knowing that I'm talking to individuals who are doing ministry in rural settings and small town settings, a lot of times you may think and look with envious eyes towards those who maybe have more technology or more insert whatever here. I want to say from the very beginning, I'm not going to do the technology shtick of you need to go out and buy this, or you need to go out and invest in this, and here's your prescriptive thing, and spend all the money and everything else. I'm going to say that you are in a very unique position to say you can turn the ship faster. You can do a lot of things where your size and the way in which you do ministry has better equipped you to make changes going forward. Bigger isn't always better. It's you think the Titanic. It's easier to move the ship when you're smaller, you're more nimble. It wasn't for them, and they ran into things. So I would start by saying with technology, the bright and shiny object isn't always going to be the one thing that is best suited for everybody. Bigger isn't always better. You don't need to have all the bells, the whistles, the $1 million invested in technology for doing ministry. Sometimes it's as simple as a cell phone on a tripod. We'll talk about some of that as we get further into this. But bigger isn't always better. The fact that you're able to be a little more hyper-focused on your ministry. You know exactly what you need to do. You know exactly what limitations and strengths you have. When it comes to technology, that is going to allow you to be a little more laser-focused than perhaps a bigger church or a bigger organization that would be more inclined to have big versus very narrow and focused. One of the things I think that sometimes gets lost in the noise when we start talking about technology is that small changes are going to be more impactful in the long run, especially in a lot of your situations. Making a small but more meaningful change using technology or integrating technology is going to go much farther and have a much greater impact than somebody who has more or is bigger or is in a different inner city or whatever situation. Those impactful changes go much farther, and sometimes that's hard to see as we start implementing technology. We start integrating things and making those changes, and that's something to always remember, is to say, look, you're making a small change. It's going to have the repercussions. It might be a week, 2 weeks, it might be a year down the road. But to play that long game, to know that a small change is going to make a big difference. So the big changes might not be what you need to do. It might just be something small. We'll talk about some of those small changes here in a little bit. Start with what you have. And I kind of want to leave this last section here for bigger is not always better. Start with what you have. If you have a piece of technology that you're maybe not using to the fullest to start with, figure out how you can better integrate it in your specific setting. Read the manual. It's amazing some of the things you learn when you actually read through things and to say, okay, great. Do a little Google search and say, how are people integrating this in a better and different way? Start with what you have. Then say, okay, how can I increase going from there? That's that, bigger is not always better. Use with what you have. Some of the most impactful technological changes I've seen in a lot of our small churches and small schools over the course of the pandemic in the last couple months have been, they found what it was that they had and they made it work, and they focused on making the technology invisible. So biggest thing, if you've got something, learn it well, do it well, and then go forwards and expand from there. But just don't go run out and buy the shiny new objects. We'll talk again here about how that kind of integrates in the order in which to start thinking about technology going forward. Okay, so bigger is not always better. Keep that in mind. The second thing, when thinking about technology, and this took me the longest time. I started out in the classroom as a classroom educator. I was 6th grade as a homeroom, 6, 7, 8 social studies, math. Shockingly, by the end, I was also the director of technology where I was serving. And it was always, for me, I was a gearhead growing up. And it was, I had the shiny object and I knew I wanted to do this with this. My dad was an engineer. We tinkered. So I was enamored with the stuff as opposed to the process to kind of get me to where I needed to be of the how. So with the ministry objective piece is, if you're starting to think about how can I continue expanding or how can I continue integrating different technologies or research, and you're figuring out what's going to work best, you have to start with an objective. Simon Sinek, author of a book called Start With Why. Great line, great book. Go read it. It will kind of make you think differently about asking the questions before you start using X. In our case, we'll start talking about technology. When it comes to purchasing and dealing with technology, don't just go out, like I said, and choose something because the church on the street did it or whatever else. Ask the question of how this will further my ministry. How will this further what we're trying to do as a church? How does this interact with our mission and vision statements? A lot of places don't think about that kind of in-depth discussion or investigation when thinking about bringing in even something as simple as different sound or new presentation modes or projectors, or in our case for the last 6 months, live streaming. Asking the question of how will this, what we're trying to do, how can this be helped by technology? What is it that we're trying to do? Why are we doing things? Asking those questions from the very beginning really puts you in a different mindset when you start talking and thinking about, technology in any ministry setting. This is, small or large. In the small church and the rural church, it's a lot more important to think about this question because you may um, have a different audience that you're going to be addressing and thinking about each time that you ask that question. So being sure to start with why, tying it to concrete objectives in your ministry. Why put up screens? I know it's kind of always been the hot button. You're going to put up a projector screen in a sanctuary. Okay, great. Why are we doing that? Is it to, reduce the cost of printing bulletins? Is it to make it bigger for everybody to see? Is it simply just because we want to do it because everybody else is doing it? Not always a good reason. But asking those questions and actually writing them down and sharing them with people and different groups within your congregation, your constituency, to say, why are we doing this? This is what we're looking to do. What are your thoughts? Focus groups, but tying it to concrete ministry objectives. How does it, share and spread what it is that we're trying to do for whatever initiative that we're working on? So I think that knowing why it is that you're doing something goes a long way. Write it down. That's a big one, and that's a challenge always for a lot of people. If you don't write something down, it doesn't happen. It's an interesting thing to think about. If you're just saying we're going to integrate technology, okay, write it down. Write a plan up, tie it to your objectives, look at it. Does it look good? Can it be shared? Is it something that people would question? Is there stuff that you can kind of write through and talk through? One of the other pieces there, if you write it down, you're able to share it. You're able to share it with the congregation, why we're making a change, why we're integrating this piece of technology, why we're doing something differently. It goes into the communication piece, we'll talk about later on. But I think, writing it down, having a plan, tying what you're doing to an objective is big. And I mentioned mission and vision. It's an interesting discussion when you start having, how can a piece of technology, screens, streaming, microphones, XYZ, how can that further what it is that we're going to do? And that only strengthens some of the rationale, and it also will get you thinking about what else you need the technology to do. I know at my church here in St. Louis, we wanted to bring in a new soundboard, whatever, and we started talking about it and thinking about, okay, great, so how has it been used? And we listed out the reasons. And then we're like, oh, wait, it was used for this. And we started writing, it was used for this. Oh, yeah, we pulled it out to go do it for something in the church and the school. And right. That also drives the conversation, but it'll also drive what it is that you're going to be implementing. And because you've thought of all of the potential use cases and you've done your homework and you've done your research. Now, this may not, if you're a pastor or a church leader in this situation, it doesn't always have to be you. Committees are wonderful. Delegation is key. When it comes to technology, finding somebody who's got the itch that can help you with how that's just what drives them, and that can help them write it down and integrate with the ministry. You bring those conversations together, but tying it to the objectives is a big piece of the technology in any ministry setting. So start with why, answer the question, then it kind of rolls downhill from there, and you start thinking about the actual technology you need to and could possibly be integrating. All right. I would say, if I asked you the question of think back over the last 9, 10 months, year, have you been more reactive or proactive? I know we were all kind of thrown for a loop with the ministry setting in which we found ourselves. I know when Amy Gertz asked me to present, it was way back before the last RSTM conference, and it was before any of this happened. And we were thinking, oh, great, we can talk about specific technologies and all these things. And I think now it's more conceptual in a lot of what we're dealing with, and how to better approach some of the technologies that we need, how to get ready for changes. So being reactive versus proactive is a big piece to this. when we talked about the second thing with the ministry objectives, that's going to get you kind of thinking to be proactive. Why are we doing something? Do we need to go further? Do we need to think about, okay, we're going to invest in something this year? We're going to upgrade our sound in the sanctuary. Okay, you've addressed the why. People can't hear it. Maybe it's even to the point of you have people in your congregation who have hearing aids that can now interact with the soundboard and can get really clear sound. Great, you've made the decision. Okay, we're going to invest in a soundboard this year, and that means we also need, here's your laundry list of items, speakers and microphones and wires and widgets and dongles and all of the fun things. Now you're starting to think a little proactive and realizing, okay, great, what can I do better moving forward? What can I do this year, next year, the year after that? As opposed to just saying, hey, we're in a pandemic and we can't hold church services and we're not set up at all to do any ministry not in the building. I kind of lump that into a big topic. A lot of these technologies that we're seeing being integrated today with good sound and streaming, which we'll talk a little more about here in a little bit, serve dual purposes. Yes, in times of emergency, in times of crisis. You get a blizzard. That's a lot different than a pandemic, but it really has the same type of impact on ministry. Your people can't come into the building. So investing in ways to bring worship to them to the best of our ability. I know there are some limitations there. Thinking through what potential issues, how they can serve dual roles. That's that proactive piece. You've got your plan. You've got your ministry objectives that you're dealing with. That's being more proactive. When it comes to being proactive, I know budgets they look drastically different right now, and they're going to look drastically different going forward. They've always looked drastically different in a lot of the rural and small town settings. I get that. Try to have an extra X on hand. It's one of those things where if you have something that your congregation has gotten used to and it will detract from, or I shouldn't say maybe detract, it will distract, maybe that's the better word, from their worship in the building, find a way to have an extra one of those on hand. If it's an extra microphone, even if it's handheld versus lavalier, whatever else, have an extra something in case something breaks. Now, I know that's not possible with the big ticket items like soundboards and projectors and stuff like that. But always batteries for microphones, that's a given. Have an extra set stashed somewhere that nobody knows where they're at except for maybe the tech guys, and they know if we use it, we have to replace it. An extra bulb for a projector. It's a good investment. Those things go out at the worst possible time, Easter morning. Invest in those. Have them stashed somewhere. Have, in case of emergency, break glass. Those are being the proactive steps, and to be prepared for when things just don't go right. When we start talking social media, have more than one person who can go live and stream, who has access to accounts. Share a document when it comes to passwords with more than just one person, to being able to they're the only ones that can log in. Have it so if you are streaming, you can pick up a phone if you really had to and stream from there. Those emergency situations where you have something extra on hand and ready just in case, to be proactive. Being proactive, invest in something, know where you're going. Don't do it all at once. That hurts financially, training-wise, the skill set that you have to have on hand. Spread it out. If you're going to do something, think down the road. Think where you can go. Small baby steps going into it. Get people used to it. Make the changes. There's a little bit of a psychology into being the proactive piece too. You don't always want to be playing catch up. I know, at least here in the school ministry office, we played a lot of catch up right when all of the COVID stuff started. And it's one of those things where it made us run harder. We get it. But it got us thinking about where we need to think down the road for what could potentially happen. What do we need to have ready? What policies and procedures on our end needed to be in place? What technology we needed to have. I know doing a webinar from my living room wasn't exactly on the bucket list this year. And thinking through how to better prepare with the least possible investment as possible Doing your research, asking your questions, figuring out how to better be prepared. One more last piece to being proactive. Invest in your people. That's something that we always don't do well in the church. We always find, the person who knows the tech. Okay, great. You're now our sound guy, lighting technician, and everything else. What happens when that person gets sick? What happens when that person in their real job gets transferred? Spreading out the knowledge, finding ways to invest in the people that are in your congregation and say, what and how can we equip more people to serve? That's that proactive piece. Even just holding a training once a year on what you have of your technology. So everybody's just a little comfortable so that if something breaks, somebody else can go, oh, I know that happened a year ago, and then this is how we fixed it. So finding ways to better think through your people and training up your people and sharing the ways in which they can serve using what you have, because they're not going to always be as comfortable with it if they don't know what's all there. So being proactive versus reactive, something to think about. I know we're always struggling with this one. I know we do. I know I do personally sometimes. But finding ways to write it down, have crisis manuals, have instruction manuals for tech in wherever you have your tech set up so people can reference it real quick. All of those types of things being proactive. All right, number 4. Okay, communication. I think this one is the most, I don't want to say visible, but I do at the same time, because communicating changes is especially when it comes to technology, is going to be what makes or breaks the way in which it's appreciated, the way in which it's used, the way in which people view it, how people think about it going forwards. So I think communication is one of those things that we know we need to focus on. We sometimes get stuck in a rut when it comes to communication. So there's going to be 3 pieces I want to talk about here today for communication when it comes to technology. The first part is really the psychology of the communication and the change. So the key thing about making changes in technology is communicating those changes so people get comfortable with it before it shows up. I know I've served in churches of large and small. I grew up in a rural town, and we had 25 people in service on a Sunday morning. And then one of my calls when I was a teacher, we had 1,500 people in a service on a Sunday morning. The communication piece, when you brought in a new piece of technology for both groups, it didn't matter. One group was more vocal because there were less of them. You heard it more. That was the only difference. So when it comes to bringing in a new piece of technology, have the conversation, start the conversation, be honest and open with everybody. This is why we're starting to do it. You've talked about it with your ministry goals and your plans. Okay, great. Now get it in front of everybody. Say, this is what it's going to look like. Bring in a demo to show people this is what it can do. Maybe not on a Sunday morning, maybe not in a ministry setting, maybe in an off hour in a week, something. Show people what it can do. If it's a projector, if it's a sound, if it's streaming, try it to find whatever that lowest barrier to entry is and expose people to it, to say, this is where we're thinking of going. Here's what we're talking about doing. Ask your questions now as we start rolling to it. And amazingly, you'll find the anxiety level drops with newness of technology. It will also bring out more questions. It will flesh out more, well, why isn't it doing this? Or can it do this? Or how does it do this better? Or you'd be amazed at the questions that come out that you didn't think of, bringing more people into the conversation. It's that working with whoever it is that's going to impact the most and bringing them into the conversation and the discussions and the decision-making process when it goes into technology. Now, that doesn't mean that there has to be, a committee for everything and whatever, but it's always a struggle when it comes down to one person making the decision and just saying, this is what we're doing, without really thinking through how that's impacted. So bring more people into it. I know we have to do that with all of the stuff that we do. Just say, okay, great, we're going to make this change. We've been working on, an online system for accreditation here now for 2 years, and we've been talking about it for 6. Getting people comfortable with what that really means, fleshing out all those pieces. It's a long game on some of this stuff. Same thing for technology. How is this going to impact, how it is that we do ministry, how it is that we worship. That's part one. Part two, the communications piece of meeting people where they're at to get that communicated. We do it in webinars, in newsletters that go out. But one of the big pieces that we've seen a lot of change here over the last couple months, years, that's really fleshed out a lot of the conversations and the way in which we interact with our congregations and our ministries is this little thing called social media. Some of you have probably heard of it. Some of you might be in charge of it. That communications medium is something that's not going to go away, isn't going to lessen in any way. And I think a lot of people are expecting some type of interaction from our church at whatever level in the social media space. So finding a way to continue to engage in that communication piece going forward in social media is key. I've done countless social media presentations for ministry, for schools, etc. And one of the biggest pieces is to say, pick one and do it well. Yes, you can be on everything at all the time, but that's the old, you can do one thing really well or everything poorly mentality. So to think, yes, you could be on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Pick one. Find where your people are at. Okay, if you're really needing to go to 2, do 2. If you pick the big boys, Facebook and Twitter / Instagram, whatever your reason for doing it is. If it's a communication piece, if it's the groups, if it's imagery in Instagram, great. But understand why you're doing it, but also have a presence. Be there. Know where your people are at and communicating and chatting. And it was always the dichotomy between the digital native and the digital immigrant when you talk about people being on social media or not. The generations coming up, I'll be honest, I'm a millennial, and the groups behind me, it just is. It's not a different aspect of how we communicate. It is it just is. It's there at all times. I remember the times when it wasn't. So it's that unique and interesting piece of being able to cross the lines here to say, yes, I knew a time when it was, and yes, when it wasn't. But the was piece of social media is here, and it has to have some sort of focus for the communication. Now, I want to be honest and be open. If it's not your comfort level, great. Find somebody who can help. Find somebody whose comfort level it is that you can kind of walk through. If this is what we're trying to do with it from a ministry standpoint, here's what we want it to be. Here's how we want to communicate. Here's how we communicate. Here's where we're at. Here's what we're going to do with it. And let them, explore it and run with it and work with them to say, this is the presence we want to have online. But you have to be there. You have to have that integration piece going forwards for your communication. Again, ask the questions. Where are people at? Where are they having those conversations? And it has to be done. It has to be done well. It has to be consistent. It has to be. People need to know who you are in that online space. The marketing, the branding. I know that's something we don't always talk about the best in our ministry. But knowing it's the same face on morning devotion, or that's live streamed, or it's the same start and end of a live stream, or it's the same time for something every day, or it's the same whatever post at whatever time doing X, Y, or Z. That communication piece with the technology and the integration is really going to be key going forwards. Be ready for the changes that are going to be happening in communication. If you think back before, yikes, 6 months, 8 months ago, if I polled the group, I would say, how many of you were for live streaming on a consistent basis? Did you invest in it differently? Did you think about it differently in the last couple months? Those changes happened rapidly. Same thing within social media. What changed? Can you do groups differently? Can you do streaming differently? What interaction can you have differently? All these pieces, it's constantly moving. Keeping aware of the changes, being aware of what the different platforms are doing. Is Facebook allowing streaming of X, Y, or Z? Is different limitations? Is there a better platform for whatever demographic now that you're trying to reach and interact with? Keeping up on that, finding people who can help you answer some of those questions. And then the last piece for that, in that social media and the communications, find a group, find somebody who you can bounce ideas off of. I'll put a shameless plug in here for one of the Facebook groups that a lot of us are a part of that deal with communications. It's called Lutheran Communicators. There's north of 2,700 people as of this morning when I looked, asking questions about how to do this in ministry for communication, or this for technology and communication, or how do you do live stream? All of the questions. Finding a group, interacting with those people, asking other churches in your area how they're doing stuff. But have those conversations, communicate both internally and externally about what's needed and what's working. There's a question that came in, and I'll address it here right now. It says, what does it mean to do communications well? People's opinions vary wildly on this. I would say one piece to doing it well is that the technology fades into the background. Meaning, if you're doing live streaming, it's got to be clear. It's got to be able to be heard well. It has to make sense for somebody who's listening and watching and interacting and trying to worship alongside of you. If they get lost in trying to go here and click here and listen here, it's got to be just simply something that pops up. That's from a live streaming perspective when it comes to doing it well. Sometimes I want to substitute well for professional. That's an interesting way to think about it. How would you expect, I don't know, a multi-million-dollar organization to do live streaming or to do communication? What is it that makes that done well? Is it, I don't want to say pretty, is it designed? Is it appealing to the eye? Well, in terms of a newsletter for communication, is there's no spelling mistakes. The formatting makes sense. There's not events on there that have gone or that have happened in the past that shouldn't be on there anymore. Some of those little things that we don't think once we're on one side of the desk versus receiving the information, we don't think it really impacts people, but it does. It detracts from your message. So I think that's some of the done well, where it's maybe even a little more time and energy and effort spent on the communication between the times that we see people face to face to do it well. Again, I know this is the technology session and the group here, but I think that one of those pieces that doing it well, sometimes people say, oh, I have to do all of the social medias, and I have to do all of the bells and whistles, and I have to stream on every platform, and I have to do cutting with scenes, and if you're live streaming, and audio and video. No, pick what it is that you're doing and make it so that it is done professionally and well and clean and effective. And maybe that's the better word for communication. Is it effective? Ask the question. I know some of the places that I've worshiped at have sent questionnaires out over the last months and said, is our communication working? Do you need to hear more or less from us? How can we be doing more or less? They're using, a MailChimp or a whatever flavor of the month for your online forms are, Google Forms or Microsoft Forms or whatever else, and asking the questions to say, are we communicating well? Is there something that we can do better with our messaging, our live streaming, our da-da-da-da-da? So that would be the well in communications. All right, number 4, like I said, communication, early, often, effective, well. Leverage the technologies that you have, leverage the people that you have, invest in those as well. All right, number 5, keep moving. I used to do a presentation for educators that was technology at the bleeding edge. And it was what's coming 5, 10 years down the road that could impact school ministry, educational ministry, classrooms. Now, I'm not saying any of that came to be. It was what people were talking about, but it got a lot of people thinking about what's coming. What's that next? What piece of, in our case, technology is going to answer the questions that we looked at when we talked about, our ministry objectives and our mission and vision and where we want to be going forward? What plan? Okay, I've heard a news report about this piece of technology. Okay, could that be something that could integrate with what we're trying to do? Ask the question, do the research. You're like, how do I do this? Okay. The concept of lifelong learning, some of you might be familiar with. Professional development, we would call it in the educator world. Learning more about what's coming, being aware, listening to podcasts or blogs, subscribing to something that might be out of our comfort zone in terms of technology. A company or a distributor like B&H. If you're not familiar with B&H, they are all things tech for all people. If you ever need to buy anything, you can buy anything there. Not a shameless plug, but hey, I've been able to get both my stuff ordered, but also my questions answered through their help, their blogs, their discussion boards, their videos, their webinars, all of these different things that have given me ideas of how to better move forward. So finding a way to interact with the knowledge experts in the industry of what's coming. So in investing in yourself to know what's coming and keeping moving. If it's not you, if it's not your comfort zone, it's okay. That's an honest answer. But to say, I got to have a little bit of knowledge, but I'm going to lean on somebody who has a ton of knowledge. I'm going to find somebody in the congregation. I'm going to find somebody who's retired. I'm going to find somebody who's in the industry, somebody whose passion it is to do the homework, the research that you've brought in to say, okay, here's what my vision and mission with the congregation's help here has been established as. Now, how can you help with your love and knowledge of technology and learning? Okay, and they might say, okay, well, we can do this and 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 this. Great, you've now got your advocate that can do some of the homework and some of the research and maybe even some of the wires and widgets and integration. But the other piece to this with the keep moving is pick something every year to do. They might give you a laundry list, or you might have a laundry list of the things. Great. Find a way to do one thing a year, two things a year, one piece of something a year. We talked about that earlier. These are big investments when it comes to technology, especially at the congregational level. I referenced, an audio system earlier. We're talking thousands of dollars. We get that. Finding a way to, invest in it. Capital campaigns, donations, asking people who may have a love for this that you never even knew about. I know some of my previous churches, we found there were people who had retired from the electronics industry or whatever that were in on the development of whatever technology that worked here in St. Louis, that worked for Boeing or Lockheed or any of these guys that had a heart for it, and they would give to an initiative. You've seen the same thing in your ministry settings, but keep moving, keep putting it in front of people if that's something that you want to invest in going forwards. I mentioned the aware of what's coming. Those groups will help you as well, and listening and being aware. Again, there are an innumerable amount of resources and blogs. I mentioned B&H as a company. The Philo conference, first in, last out. That's the technology group within ministry. We get it. We're the first in, we're the last out with plugging everything in and unplugging everything. The church tech blogs are innumerable, especially in the social media space too. From a ministry standpoint, regardless of where you are at in the spectrum of conservative or liberal, somebody like a Carey Nieuwhof is going to be looking at technology from a different lens than you might be doing. Different people, different walks of life, but be aware of what's there and what's coming. If I were to put, and I'll kind of wrap up the keep moving part, if I were to put one thing that I think is coming in terms of ministry and technology, is the ability to have people who are worshiping with you, and whatever that looks like, that aren't in your building. I know we've touched on live streaming, and we've touched on the ability to push something out. But in a lot of cases, that's just, I'm broadcasting, it's going one way. There needs to be the interaction to say, okay, I'm broadcasting, but I'm also having somebody monitoring and interacting with the people who are watching to say, okay, great, how can I pray for you? And interacting with that. And that feeds somehow into the service. So to say that there's going to be a tie-in between people who are in your sanctuary and who are not, that going forwards with the technology pieces are really what's happening, where you have an effective ministry in person, but you also have the ability to, I will put this in air quotes, worship with people who are not physically present. And I know with the sacraments and everything else in that regard, that needs to be in person, but there is an element of interacting with people who are not physically present for whatever reason, health, disease, pick your poison, snow. That is really going to flesh out going forwards for technology ministry, and what hardware you're going to need to make that happen in your specific setting, and the people that you're going to need, and the investment in the people that you're going to need, is the keeping moving forwards part. All right, that's a lot. It was a lot of thinking, a lot of theory, a lot of things that I mentioned from a technology standpoint. We talked about these 5 things. Bigger is not always better. Some ministry objectives, the concept of being reactive versus proactive and why that's important, how essential and important communication is, and the realities of keeping moving with technology as you go forwards. I'll put this back up here again if you didn't catch it at the beginning, to reach out with any questions or thoughts or anything that we can't get answered here in the next 15 minutes in terms of questions, or something, like I said, that you want to have a long form discussion on or need more assistance with for physical technology. There's my contact information, and more than willing and always willing to help. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. It's always a joy to hear this anyone talk with some passion about their subject, and you're so immersed in it, and yet you're still trying to stay on top of how things are moving forward. And that's awesome. That's very, very helpful to us. A couple of questions that came in on the audience question form. Do you have any suggestions on teaching the elderly to use technology? For example, Zoom.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is figuring out how the person who's asking the question, figuring out how they might learn best. I know some people, if they don't have somebody who can literally sit down next to them and walk them through, they're never going to get it. I think some people are able to simply just pull up a tutorial on YouTube, watch it 1, 2, 10 times, and get it. I think there's also the piece of, or there is something to be said about step by step by step by step, to say, okay, step 1, turn on computer. Step 2, and it's funny, we joke about how far back you have to go in some of the processes, but that's the thing, is to say, I need to start at square 0, square -1, and assume that they don't know anything, and no one will be offended if they're reading through instruction steps and like, I've got that. It's just, it's fine. They know it and they're going to keep going. So I think it's having multiple ways of training and sharing the information, video, step by steps. If you can do a person to person, great. But also being as unbelievably simple as humanly possible, to bring them along. Now, that doesn't mean just throwing it at them, but I think to say, give them the reason why you're using it, and then slow roll and check back in with them. It's kind of that multi-step process to say, here's the information, here's why we're doing it, here's how to do it. Okay, in a day or 2 or a week, to say, can I help you with anything? Is there anything that you didn't get? And they're like, oh, I didn't get this part. And it reinforces as you go forward.
I've been extremely, I don't want to say surprised, I shouldn't be surprised, but pleasantly surprised anyway, about or with the fact that we've had so many of our older members really embrace a lot of the technology. So when we were already live streaming before the pandemic hit, so we were already in a fairly good position. But when we started doing Zoom Bible studies and things, we had so many of our folks just picking up. We even had a group that was, before I got here. I've only been here a little over a year. Before I got here, they were meeting in each other's homes to share Bible studies, and they started Zooming on their own. And so it was fantastic. So they're figuring out the technology. It was when I started, it was fairly simple to help them out. Another question by our same attendee is, what have you done to share music and deal with lag? This is
Oh,
when I read that, I thought, oh, I'm going to leave that one to Matt.
oh man. Streaming music's always going to be rough. It is. There is no perfect way to do it. I mean, you can talk to some of the industry experts when it comes to, trying to decrease lag, but there are so many different variables in there in terms of the device that you're streaming from, the method in which you're streaming it, the device that the person is listening on, anything that's in between, from wires to trees to birds. I mean, it's wild. I mean, there are some things that you can do to speed it up, but and I'll be blatantly honest, it's going to cost you money. It's one of those things where if you're investing at lowest bidder for streaming technology in a lot of cases, you're going to get lowest bidder. People have said, well, why is there lag on, a Google, what is it called now? Google Meet. It's free. Okay, well, why isn't there any lag on Zoom? I've had plenty. Okay, great. Are you paying for it? Oh, yeah. So I think there's something to be said about if you're going to actually invest in a platform and a service, you're going to get what you're going to pay for. And some of the higher tiered levels of some of the subscription pieces really do have a different latency and a different lag in audio. The same thing with some of your hardware. Some of your I would say big boys in the industry have figured out how to get rid of some of those issues with their hardware, but again, you're going to pay for it. There's no perfect way. If you're trying to do back and forth with audio and singing, you got to remember that you're going through, out, decoding, back and in again. There's always going to be a different lag with all sorts of different variables. So it's hard, but sometimes asking, if you're using a provider or a service, asking if there's a better way to decrease that, message them and help, or the company that makes it. If you're using a hardware or different software, whatever, message them and say, hey, this is what we're facing. Da, 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 da. You're not going to be the first. I'll be honest. Somebody's had that problem before. Reach out. The Lutheran Communicators group is good too, to say, hey, we've got this issue. Somebody's going to step up and say, hey, we've got the same issue and this is what we did to fix it. Stuff like that. Just ask the question, but it's always going to be a struggle.
Yeah, that's a perennial problem. You see that same question popping up all over the place all the time. And just not a shameless plug, because while I'm a member of the Lutheran Communicators Group, I'm a passive member. I like to look. I haven't really had to ask a lot of questions, but don't be embarrassed there either, because there are folks who get on there and ask. There was just a lady, I think it was today or yesterday, was asking a very simple question. They're just starting to use maybe a Zoom technology, and so this is something that most people are just, oh, Zoom, that's like breathing now. But don't be embarrassed to ask those questions either, because there's always people out there, especially in that particular group, who are going to be super helpful.
Yeah.
And since we are, yeah, that particular group has been a huge help to us. I've just been able to go back through and glean a lot of information out of there. But talking about social media, though, one other question we had: what would you say are the top 3 social media platforms churches or schools, churches and schools perhaps, should have a presence?
Okay, so the big 3 are, well, I'll explain with a caveat here. The big 3: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Okay, but if you're talking true engagement numbers, Snapchat has snuck into the top 3 as of whatever that was last week. in terms of user base and interaction. However, that's a very, very specific user set of who, if you're trying to target, the less than millennials group, I'd say that to be safe. But I would say, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are your big three. If you had to pick two, I'd say Facebook and Instagram, because it gives you two different feels. It gives you the communication and interaction piece that you get a lot in Facebook, and it gives you a lot more functionality in there too. And Instagram gives you the ability to show. I mean, it's picture based. Let's be honest, or video, whatever you want to go, but visual. It gives you the ability to showcase part of your ministry, what your ministry does. People love looking at pictures. I mean, let's be honest. And that would be one of the big ones. People have argued for years within the social media circles whether or not YouTube is a social media. I would say it's more of a platform for content as opposed to the interaction. A lot of places don't get the interaction that they want in YouTube, but it's going to be a place where you're going to put video and content. So I would kind of leave that one off the list at this point. But those are the biggies that I would say to have a presence on at this juncture.
But I think you made a really good point there, Matt, is really determining what's your audience going to be. We have really identified here that our primary audience is going to be the parents and grandparents of our students at our school, and then our members that are about the same age and older, well, they're going to be on Facebook. But we're not going to use Facebook to try to engage our high school youth and younger because they're just not there. So we're going to go a different direction from them. But most of our effort, is being put into Facebook because that's where we're going to be able to engage the greatest number of people. But just identifying that, I love your emphasis. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say too, it doesn't hurt to ask where people are at, where they're getting stuff. But on the flip side of that, I would also say, pick one and just tell people this is where we are, and they're going to be okay with that.
Yeah, drive them that direction. That's not a bad thing. When I got here, our website was woefully outdated. It hadn't been updated in forever, and it was really on the front burner as far as what we were going to do strategic planning wise. But then the pandemic hit, that got stopped. So we decided, well, rather than try to reinvent the wheel with this website, we're going to put all our effort into the Facebook page. And now on the backside, we're going to be able to slowly work on the website and kind of be able to integrate that in too. So it's a matter of what the priority is at the moment too. I thought something very interesting, and again, I love your emphasis on communicate. The more we communicate, the more people are going to embrace things, or at least not be quite as afraid of them. But that proactivity, I've heard probably on the news here lately, whether it's the radio or the television, just on local stations, how classrooms or schools are not going to have any more snow days.
Yeah.
Well, the same goes for us. You had mentioned weather. How are we communicating to our members that if we do have a snow day where we would not have a physical service because of the weather, how is everyone going to be able to get on? It's going to be live stream. You're going to post it up. Where's that going to be? And so just being able to take a look at that and communicate that. And I love proactive versus reactive, long game versus crisis. If you're in it for the long game, being proactive, then when the crisis hits, you're better positioned to make a reasoned move, as opposed to, fortunately for us, like I said, we were live streaming already when the pandemic hit, so we were already positioned. So all we had to do was tweak things to make them better, considering and we were getting feedback from our audience. The bells are ringing. That means we're straight up 1 o'clock. But I got to tell you, Matt, I got to thank you. I always say if I go to a seminar or I'm on a webinar, if I can carry one thing away, I'm super happy about that. And you reminded me Sunday I put the last battery in my microphone. So I've got to go out and get a new package of batteries. So I appreciate that very much. I took way more than that away though. So again, thank you, Matt, for being with us today, and all of you who are on our webinar. And don't hesitate to get a hold of Matt or contact our office. We'd be happy to help you out as best we can as well. And just to let you know, coming up in November on the 19th, we have a webinar, more congregational partnership training. So I'll be leading that, talking more about how we can develop partnerships among congregations and related ministries. And then really kind of a unique situation. We have Deaconess Faith Swenson joining us in December on the 10th. She was actually supposed to be in this time slot. And I think, Matthew, weren't you supposed to be on the 10th of December?
Yep.
Yep, and Faith had a new baby, so we give thanks to God for that. And she's taking care of that little one, but she'll be joining us in December and talking about her partnership and ministry models using deaconess ministry in rural and small town congregations as well. So join us for those webinars. Again, Matt, thank you so much. God's blessings to you all in your ministry. Don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. Blessings to you all.